Emma had always believed in the concept of perfect love. For 7 years, she had given herself entirely to Tom, her husband. She had sacrificed, compromised, and done everything she could to make their life together work. Yet, there was always something off. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Tom, on the other hand, always claimed he was romantically challenged. He told her time and again that he didn't understand the need for grand gestures or the traditional sense of romance. But despite his words, Emma couldn't help but feel that something was missing, something that perhaps wasn't a mere lack of understanding, but something far more painful, a lack of love. It was a rainy Thursday evening when Emma stumbled upon the first clue. She had been going through some old photos on Tom's phone, hoping to find something nostalgic, something that would remind her of the man she once thought she knew. Her fingers paused on a particular image, Tom, his arm draped around a woman Emma didn't recognize. They were standing in a park, their smiles broad and carefree. The caption below read, "Best night ever. # with MIA. MIA? Who was MIA? Emma's heart dropped as she scrolled through the conversation beneath the photo. It wasn't just a simple photo, it was a thread of messages between Tom and his friends, filled with comments about how lucky he was to have MIA in his life. Words like gorgeous, amazing, and so happy for you filled the screen. This wasn't just a flirtation. This was something much more. Emma's mind raced, but she refused to let the tears fall. She had to know the truth. She had to find out if her suspicions were justified. The next day, Emma took matters into her own hands. She began digging deeper. Late that night, she found receipts hidden in Tom's jacket pocket. Expensive jewelry, designer bags, and the most alarming of all, a reservation at a luxury hotel under Mia's name. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized what was happening. Tom had been cheating on her. He had been living a double life, and Emma had been none the wiser. But there was one thing Tom hadn't counted on: Emma wasn't the kind of woman to fall apart. No, she wasn't angry. She wasn't going to scream or cry. Instead, she would do something far more calculated. As the evening dragged on, Emma found herself sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. The security footage from their driveway was playing on loop. It showed Tom and MIA walking hand in hand, their laughter echoing through the cold night air. Emma's eyes narrowed as she watched them. Tom didn't know it yet, but Emma was already planning her next move. The following days were filled with tension. Emma continued to observe Tom's every move, meticulously collecting pieces of evidence. She wasn't acting on impulse, no, this was all part of a plan. Her mind, sharp as ever, refused to let the emotional weight of betrayal cloud her judgment. She had become a woman on a mission. It was late one night when Emma's investigation took an even darker turn. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through Tom's messages when her eyes landed on a particular exchange. It was between Tom and one of his colleagues. The messages were casual at first, but as she read deeper, Emma felt her stomach churn. It was clear, Tom and MIA had been in contact for months, meeting at secret locations, planning getaways, and discussing things that Emma had no part in. But that wasn't the worst of it. Emma's eyes widened as she read one message from Tom to MIA, confessing something that left her speechless. "I don't know what to do. I love you, but I can't leave Emma yet. She still believes in me." The message was chilling. For all the years Emma had spent supporting him, loving him, she was nothing more than a placeholder. A woman in his life who didn't matter enough to be kept in the loop, but still important enough to not fully let go of. Emma clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. It wasn't the betrayal that stung the most, it was the deceit, the way Tom had manipulated her, made her feel that she was the one who wasn't enough. But no longer. She wasn't going to waste her energy on anger. Instead, she would turn her attention to something far more important, her future. The next day, as Emma drove to work, her mind whirled with the discoveries she had made. She drove past a small, quiet cafe that she used to visit with Tom, a place they had shared so many memories. Now, it seemed to be a symbol of everything that had been false. She remembered how Tom had used to tell her how much he loved it there, how he had discovered it during a solo trip and couldn't wait to take her. It was all lies. The image of that cafe haunted her as she walked through the office doors. But something strange happened when she sat at her desk. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from MIA. "Emma, I know what you're thinking. But you should know, I'm not the one at fault here. Tom's been unhappy for a long time. You just didn't see it." Emma stared at the message, her heart pounding. How could MIA be so bold? To assume that Emma would let this go. To think that she had the upper hand. But Emma didn't respond. She didn't need to. She was already in control. The following week, Emma's life continued in a delicate balance of tension and silence. She had grown accustomed to the empty moments, the hollow spaces that Tom had once filled with fake affection. She spent her days quietly preparing herself, emotionally detaching from the man who had once been her world. But the time was nearing. Emma knew that the inevitable confrontation was approaching. It happened one evening when Tom returned home earlier than expected. His eyes were still carrying the weight of his secret, though he tried to mask it with a forced smile. "Hey, Em," he greeted her as he entered the living room. Emma didn't flinch. She remained seated at the kitchen table, pretending to concentrate on her laptop. She didn't need to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "Hi, Tom," she replied calmly, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil that raged inside her. Tom walked over and placed his briefcase on the counter, his eyes occasionally flicking to Emma as though he were waiting for her to break the silence. He had no idea that Emma had already broken it long before, in her own mind. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, and just as Emma thought she would be the first to speak, Tom broke the stillness. "Emma, we need to talk," he said, his voice soft but serious. There was a faint edge of anxiety in his tone. Emma's eyes never left the screen in front of her, though she was perfectly aware of his presence. "About what?" she asked, almost disinterested. Tom hesitated. "About us, about MIA. I know you know, Em. I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, and Emma finally looked up at him. There was no anger in her gaze, just cold resolve. "No, Tom. Don't apologize. You've had enough time for that already," she said quietly, her voice almost unnervingly calm. Tom's face shifted, uncertainty creeping into his expression. "I was going to leave her, I swear. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It just did. I'm sorry. I'll end it, I promise." Emma stood up from the table slowly, her chair scraping across the floor. She walked towards him, her movements deliberate. She didn't want to appear too eager, too desperate for answers. She'd already learned everything she needed to know. "Do you honestly think I'm going to believe that, Tom?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. "You say you'll leave her, but you've already built a life with her, haven't you? You've already made a choice." Tom opened his mouth to protest, but Emma raised a hand, silencing him. "I don't need empty promises. I'm not interested in them anymore. I'm done." The finality in her words struck Tom like a blow. He stood there, speechless, as Emma walked past him, heading toward the door. But she paused just before she stepped outside, turning to face him one last time. "You know, Tom," she said, her voice low but resolute, "I thought I would fight for this marriage. I thought I would try to fix it. But now? I'm going to fight for myself. I'm done wasting time." Without waiting for a response, Emma walked out, leaving Tom standing there, stunned and speechless. She had made her decision. The next chapter of her life was already beginning. It had been a few days since Emma had walked out on Tom, and she had spent the time sorting through the mess of emotions that still clung to her. There was a strange feeling of freedom that came with each passing day, though, at times, it was shadowed by the weight of uncertainty. Still, she knew she had done the right thing. But what Tom would do next was the part Emma hadn't yet figured out. He hadn't reached out in a desperate plea as she had half expected. Instead, he seemed distant, almost resigned to the fate Emma had set for their marriage. It left her wondering if he truly cared at all or if his sense of entitlement to her had simply evaporated. The phone rang one evening, interrupting her quiet contemplation. Emma glanced at the caller ID. It was Tom. She hesitated for a moment before picking up, her thumb hovering over the screen. "Hello," she answered cautiously, bracing herself for whatever excuse or explanation he had come up with this time. "Emma," Tom's voice was quieter than usual. "Can we talk? I need to explain myself." Emma swallowed, steadying her breath. "What is there left to explain, Tom? I thought we were clear." Tom sighed heavily on the other end of the line. I know, but please, just hear me out. I've made mistakes, and I want to fix things. I'll do whatever it takes." Emma remained silent for a moment, considering the weight of his words. Was this just another empty promise? Another one of his last-minute attempts to cling to the life they had? She wasn't sure, but part of her wanted to hear what he had to say. "I'm listening," she finally said, her voice measured, but her curiosity getting the better of her. There was a pause on the line before Tom spoke again, his tone a little more urgent. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I can't deny what I did, but I need you to know that I still care about you, Em. I don't want to lose you." Emma rolled her eyes, though she knew he couldn't see it. "You've already lost me, Tom," she replied, her voice firm. "This isn't about you anymore. It's about me." Tom's voice shook, a hint of panic creeping in. "Emma, please. I know I've hurt you. I've hurt us both. But if you give me a chance, I'll leave MIA. I'll end everything, and we can start over. Just the two of us. I'll make it right." Emma was silent, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the familiar pull of his words, the same pull that had kept her in this toxic relationship for so long. But something inside her snapped, and she knew that there was no going back. "No," she said quietly, but with strength. "I don't need you to fix anything. I don't need you to make it right. What I need is to move on, Tom. I've given you more chances than anyone deserves, and I can't keep doing this." There was a long silence on the line before Tom spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "So that's it, then? You're done?" Emma closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. "Yes, I'm done. And so are you. I'm not your backup plan anymore." Tom was silent for a few more seconds, before he spoke, his words tinged with resignation. "I'll let you go then. I'll leave you alone." Emma felt a sense of finality in those words, but strangely, it didn't bring her the relief she had expected. There was no satisfaction in hearing him admit defeat. She was ready to move on, but the weight of the past still lingered, and she had a lot of work to do to finally free herself from the shackles of her old life. "Goodbye, Tom," she said, her voice steady. And with that, she ended the call, her finger lingering for a moment over the button. She sat in silence for a while, reflecting on the conversation that had just unfolded. It was over. Now, she had to figure out what came next. The next few days were a blur for Emma. The initial rush of ending things with Tom faded, leaving her with the quiet aftermath of a decision she had made with so much certainty. Now, it was time for her to confront the reality of life without him. As the days passed, Emma found herself questioning the choices she had made over the past few years. How had she allowed herself to fall into a routine that left her feeling invisible? The marriage, once full of promise, had become nothing more than a series of empty gestures and unspoken resentments. It was easier to ignore the cracks, easier to pretend everything was fine, but now, in the stillness of her apartment, the truth was undeniable. The truth that she had let herself be second in her own life for far too long. But that was over now. No more waiting for Tom to finally wake up, to finally see her. She was done waiting. One evening, as Emma sat alone in her kitchen, a glass of wine in hand, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. The woman staring back at her was different. She looked stronger, more self-assured. There was a calmness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She wasn't the same person who had married Tom all those years ago, and she wasn't the woman who had kept holding on despite the damage it caused. She was someone new. And she felt a stirring deep within her, a sense of power that had been dormant for so long. The phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time, it was a message from her best friend, Rachel. "Hey, Em, how about we go out tonight? You've been through a lot lately. Let's hit the town and have some fun." Emma smiled softly as she read the message. Rachel had always been the one to push her out of her comfort zone, to remind her that life was still there to be lived. Emma hadn't felt like herself in so long, but maybe it was time to change that. She quickly typed back, "You're on. Let's go out." The night air was crisp as Emma walked into the trendy bar with Rachel, the hum of chatter and laughter filling the space. She felt a slight hesitation at first, unsure of how to interact in a world that seemed so foreign after her years of isolation. But Rachel, ever the social butterfly, dragged her into the thick of things, and soon, Emma found herself caught up in the excitement of the crowd. As they mingled, Emma's mind wandered to Tom. She couldn't deny the familiarity of the pain that lingered in her chest, but there was something else now, too. A sense of excitement. She was free, really free. By the time the night was winding down, Emma had danced and laughed more than she had in months. She wasn't sure when, but at some point, she had let go of the last remnants of the woman she used to be. She was no longer the woman who lived for Tom's approval or clung to a love that had long since faded. She was herself again. The following days were filled with new experiences, each one more exhilarating than the last. Emma reconnected with old friends, took up yoga, and even began working on a personal project she had shelved years ago. She had discovered a part of herself that she had long buried, and it felt like she was rediscovering who she truly was. But despite her growing sense of empowerment, there were moments when doubt crept in. What if Tom came back, begging for another chance? What if he somehow convinced her to go back to the life they once had? Emma knew that, deep down, there would always be that lingering question. But she had come too far to turn back now. She was building a life that was hers, no one else's. One afternoon, as Emma sat on her balcony, watching the sunset, her phone buzzed once again. This time, it was an email from her lawyer, confirming the first steps in her divorce proceedings. The weight of that document hit her in a way she hadn't expected. For a moment, she just stared at it, feeling the gravity of her decision settle deep in her chest. It was official. She was free. But the freedom didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like the beginning. And for the first time in a long while, Emma didn't feel the need to look back. In the weeks that followed, Emma settled into her new reality. The apartment that once felt so cold and empty now began to feel like her sanctuary. There were no more awkward silences, no more false smiles, just a space that was truly hers. It was her first taste of independence, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had always prided herself on being a practical woman, someone who made decisions based on logic and reason. Yet now, in this moment of her life, she found herself at the mercy of emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel for years. She was angry, hurt, but most of all, she was ready. Ready to reclaim the years she had lost, to rebuild herself from the ground up. One afternoon, Emma met with her lawyer to go over the details of her divorce. The cold, sterile office felt oddly comforting, as if it was marking the official end of a chapter in her life. Her lawyer, a sharp woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, outlined the steps for the next phase: custody of the dog, division of assets, and the inevitable battle over the house. It was all business, and Emma was prepared for the fight. She had never been one to shy away from a challenge, and this was no different. But beneath the surface of her calm exterior, there was a quiet storm brewing. She could feel the weight of everything she had endured, and it was beginning to fuel her resolve. As she left the office, her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "I know it's been tough, but you've been so strong through all of this. You're going to come out of this even better than before." Emma smiled at the message, appreciating Rachel's unwavering support. She was right, she was stronger than she'd ever realized. But even as she walked through the bustling streets of London, her thoughts kept drifting back to Tom. She didn't want to think about him, she didn't even want to remember the way he used to make her feel. But the reality was, she couldn't escape the memories. They had been a part of her life for too long. Then, a few days later, the unthinkable happened. Tom showed up at her door. He looked disheveled, his eyes heavy with regret. Emma felt a pang of something, nostalgia, maybe, but it was quickly replaced by a sharp sense of clarity. He was here, not because he truly wanted to make things right, but because he couldn't stand the idea of losing her. "Emma, we need to talk," he said, his voice pleading. She took a step back, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "We have nothing to talk about, Tom." He was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. "I've made mistakes, Emma. I know that. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to understand, I've been an idiot. I want to make things right. I want us back." Emma's heart raced, but she held her ground. The old part of her wanted to take him in her arms, to tell him that everything could be fixed. But the new Emma, the one who had fought so hard for her independence, wasn't interested in false promises. "You don't get it, Tom," she said, her voice steady. "You didn't just make mistakes. You chose her over me. You made your choice, and now it's my turn to choose myself." His face fell, the realization hitting him harder than any words could. I didn't know it would come to this." "I know," Emma replied softly. "And I've spent too much time waiting for you to see it. But not anymore." With that, she closed the door, leaving him standing there in the cold. For a moment, Emma just stood there, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. She had been married to him for years, and yet, closing the door on him felt like the most freeing thing she had ever done. As she leaned against the door, her phone buzzed once more. This time, it was an email from her financial advisor, detailing the steps she needed to take in order to get her finances in order after the divorce. Emma's heart pounded as she read through the email. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control of her own life. She had come so far, and there was no turning back now. The life she was building was hers, and hers alone. With a deep breath, Emma straightened up, wiped away the last of her tears, and began to make plans for her future. She was finally ready to move on. The days following her confrontation with Tom felt like a whirlwind. Emma moved through them in a daze, her mind constantly buzzing with the weight of everything she had just experienced. But amidst the emotional chaos, there was an undeniable sense of freedom. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped. She had made her decision, and now, she was moving forward. Emma began to rediscover herself. She went back to the things she had loved before, the passions and hobbies she had buried under the weight of her marriage. She started taking painting classes, something she had always wanted to try. The colors, the brushstrokes, they gave her a sense of release. It wasn't just an escape, it was a reclamation of her identity. The woman she was before Tom, the woman who had dreams and aspirations outside of a relationship. One evening, as Emma worked on her latest canvas in her apartment, there was a knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone, but when she opened it, she found Rachel standing there, a grin on her face and a bottle of wine in her hand. "I thought you might need some company," Rachel said, stepping inside. "How's the painting going?" Emma smiled, gesturing to the canvas. "Slow, but good. It's helping me clear my head." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Is it just the painting, or have you had other breakthroughs recently?" Emma chuckled softly. "It's everything. I'm getting back to me." They sat down on the couch, sipping their wine as they caught up. Rachel had been there for Emma through it all, supporting her when she felt lost, comforting her when she felt like giving up. But now, Rachel could see something different in her. Emma was no longer the woman who had been defined by her marriage to Tom. She was becoming someone entirely new, someone powerful, someone who had control over her own life. "I'm proud of you, Emma," Rachel said sincerely, her tone full of warmth. "You've come so far. You deserve this new chapter." Emma smiled, the warmth of her friend's words settling in her chest. "I didn't think I could do it, you know? I was so sure that without him, I wouldn't be anything. But now I realize, I was always more than just his wife. I just needed to find myself again." Rachel nodded, her eyes sparkling. "And you have. You've found your strength, your passion. You're unstoppable now." As the night wore on, Emma and Rachel talked about everything, from Emma's plans for her future, to the things she had left behind, to the uncertainty that still lingered in her mind. But through it all, one thing was clear: Emma was no longer the woman who had been afraid to take the first step. She had done it, and now, there was no going back. The following days were filled with new possibilities. Emma explored job opportunities she had once dreamed of but never thought were possible. She reconnected with old friends, rekindled relationships she had neglected, and began to build a future on her own terms. One afternoon, while having lunch at a cafe, Emma ran into someone she hadn't expected: Mark, a colleague from her old workplace. He looked as surprised to see her as she was to see him. "Emma, I didn't know you were in town. It's been ages," Mark exclaimed, pulling out the chair next to her. She smiled warmly, the conversation flowing easily between them. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to connect with someone without the weight of her past weighing her down. Mark had always been kind, supportive, and easy to talk to. And now, sitting there with him, Emma couldn't help but wonder if there could be something more to their friendship. As they parted ways that afternoon, Emma felt something stir inside her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She was open to the idea of new beginnings, not just in her career, but in her personal life as well. She walked home that day with a lightness in her step, her mind full of possibilities. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally in control of her own destiny. As Emma settled into her new rhythm, the weeks passed by with a steady flow of change. She felt herself becoming more confident, more aware of the strength she had never known she possessed. The uncertainty that had clouded her life for so long began to dissipate, replaced by clarity and a sense of purpose. One afternoon, as Emma sat in her studio, working on a large canvas, her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up to find a message from Rachel, suggesting they meet for coffee that evening. Emma felt a rush of excitement. It had been a while since they had caught up properly, and after everything she had been through, a friendly conversation was exactly what she needed. When they met at the cafe, Rachel was waiting with a warm smile, as always. They hugged, and Emma noticed a new spark in Rachel's eyes, a light that told Emma she was, too, embracing change in her own life. They sat down, and Rachel immediately began telling Emma about her latest venture. She had started her own small business, a fashion consultancy. "I figured it was time to do something for myself," Rachel said, taking a sip of her coffee. "And you know what? It feels amazing. I'm in control, and I finally feel like I'm on the right path." Emma was genuinely happy for her. "That's incredible, Rachel. I'm so proud of you." As they continued talking, Emma reflected on how much had changed in her own life. She had started her own side project, a small art exhibition that she had been preparing for months. It wasn't huge, but it was hers. It was a way to express herself, a way to show the world what she had to offer beyond the shadows of her past. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Emma began, her voice thoughtful. "I used to believe that my worth was tied to someone else, my marriage, Tom's approval, the life we built together. But now, I see that my worth has always been within me. I just needed to look inward, to trust myself." Rachel smiled warmly. "That's the key, Emma. You've got the power, the ability to shape your future. It's not about anyone else, it's about you." Emma's heart swelled with gratitude. For so long, she had felt lost, adrift in a life she hadn't chosen. But now, she was finding herself again. She was becoming the woman she had always wanted to be, a woman who took charge of her own destiny, who refused to let anyone or anything hold her back. A few days later, Emma received a call from the gallery that had agreed to display her artwork. They wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss the details of the exhibition. Emma's pulse quickened as she realized just how far she had come. She had gone from being a woman defined by someone else's actions to being a woman who was creating her own future. When the day of the exhibition came, Emma stood in the gallery, looking around at the walls lined with her work. There was a sense of pride in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. She had done this on her own. There was no one else to thank, no one else to credit. It was all hers. As the evening unfolded, Emma was surrounded by people who admired her work, who saw her for who she truly was, an artist, a creator, a woman of strength and resilience. She had done it. She had reclaimed her future. Later that night, when the exhibition had come to a close and the last guests had left, Emma stood in the empty gallery, her heart full. She was no longer the woman who had been betrayed, the woman who had been broken. She was whole again, stronger than before. And as she left the gallery that night, her heart light and her mind at peace, Emma knew that this was just the beginning. The future was hers to shape, and she would do it on her own terms.